Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Today's session, we're going to be talking about digital transformation, which is the theme of our conference as well. And we're going to be trying to focus a little bit on innovation and growth. So we'll see how some real-world examples of how this is going. So I'm going to, in my presentation, I'll talk about digital transformation and what I call the new digital reality. And then I'll spend a few minutes on modern software. And that's just to set the stage because we have three interesting speakers to follow me, so I won't spend too much time. I use this chart to talk about innovation and disruption. So if you can, the vertical axis is disruptive impact, and then you can see some effects along the horizontal axis. So what we see typically in a cycle like this is going to be a mobile phones example. What we see is technologies emerge like miniaturization and Moore's law and network communications. And these things start working together and people get to think about how they can use them in conjunction with each other. And in this example, they think about making phones smaller, making flip phones, making feature phones, larger screens, text messaging, various things like that. And this is the way the competition is. So this is the first phase is technology. The technology comes about. And then the second phase is really about the application. But what can happen is, and what happened in the mobile phones case is a paradigm shift. And what happens is, in this case, is we went from a phone in your pocket to a computer in your pocket. And that meant that instead of the AT&Ts of the world controlling this space, Apple computers started to control this space. And the dynamic changed quite a bit. And that was only the beginning, because then we started to see the secondary impacts. Markets and infrastructure and ecosystems start to change. So we had all these apps and businesses really take off. And then eventually, we start to see impacts outside of the system, where it starts to impact the voting systems, for example. So that's the real transformation. And what does that mean for the industrial space? Well, we've got a lot of disruptive technologies, cloud and IoT and connectivity and machine learning, 3D printing and augmented reality. There's a host of them. And right now, we're seeing a lot of that drive interest and uptake and spending in improving asset uptime and focusing on APM and OPM along with it. So we're seeing all that kind of activity happening, but we don't know quite what the game changer is. We're starting to get a sense that maybe it's not just one thing, but maybe it's just the fact that so many things are changing. That may in itself be the game changer. So we're watching for that, but it's not something that we can depend on. So we're in that interesting stage where everybody's got to change and we don't know where we're going, but that's what makes it fun. So I think you saw this slide this morning. So we are seeing these disruptive technologies and innovation, and with some help from government initiatives, just every organization needs to change, and that's happening. And if we look at the areas that you might want to change, well, we talked about, sort of the smart factory piece, the asset performance and operations performance, and figuring that out. But that factory is going to produce, in many cases, a smart connected thing. And those smart products have some dimensions of their own that need to be transformed. And to design those products, you need to think about, well, I need to design a connected product now, and I need to think about the ecosystem that it's going to be running in, and I need to think about the data it's going to be generating, and the digital twin for it, and who has access to the data and who doesn't. And so all that needs to be taken into account way up front. You can also imagine that now that things are becoming connected, there's a lot of new services that can be offered. So that is a complete new dimension in many cases for companies. The supply chain shouldn't be ignored because that is also quickly being digitally transformed. And then at the business level, your business systems as well as the overall business processes that connect all this stuff together are also changing as a result of these new technologies. So, we've seen that the technologies can change, and we've got a list of those. We've seen that there are some areas that you should focus on. What are the results or what are the outcomes that you can pursue? And it's usually some mix of these to get you started. But that's only the beginning because you need to think about the impact of that change. And what's it going to mean for my business processes overall? And what's it going to mean for my workforce and for my information systems? And, there's a lot of changes that you have to take into account. So transformation equals change, and that's an important thing to think about in advance. And then you've got to manage all that. So how do I make my organization become an organization that thrives on innovation? And how do I put a digital strategy in place? And how do I govern it? And what does it mean for my organization? So there are a lot of management issues as well. So there's a lot here in this slide. And as I said, I don't have much time, so I'm going to continue into the next part of my talk, which is about software. And the main point I want to make here is that, plant software, the way it's being created and deployed is starting to change. So that's a very interesting thing. And that software, including AI, is what's powering this whole IoT or digital transformation revolution. So what's going on in software? Well, we're starting to see companies moving to modern software platforms. So we mean by that cloud-native microservice-based apps are coming to the plant. So we're starting to see this already. In the IT systems, we're changing everything. So we are changing the development process as moving to a DevOps model. The architecture is moving to microservices. The deployment model for apps is moving from physical to virtual and now to containers. And the infrastructure that all this runs on is moving from the data center to private cloud and now to the cloud or some mix of these. Now, this isn't universal across every company or every area that you look at, but the trend is clear, and this is the way it's all going. And it's a good thing, too, because if you just think about all the things that need to change, the application suppliers will be really hard-pressed. It may be impossible to add all the features and all the new things that all their customers are clamoring for. And every customer wants a different thing first, and maybe they all want different things when taken together. It's a big list. So what we see is, not today, but soon, industrial companies are going to move to demanding 21st century software. So instead of having an MES or a historian or a batch system or a quality management system, you might have a platform and a collection of micro apps that are targeted to do what you want. These may be provided by the same supplier you work with today. They may be by a mix of suppliers or partners, or they may be partly done by yourselves. But it becomes a lot more fluid and a lot more dynamic. So the key takeaways, that we're all comfortable with this legacy software model that we've been using for many years. There are some drawbacks, and change is coming, so we need to be ready for it. And the plant floor software suppliers are currently in the process, maybe in the back room, of moving to this new approach. So now's the time to start thinking about it. I mean, that last century software model is costly. You have to have hardware to purchase and support. It's typically a very complex and lengthy installation process. You get what everybody else gets, but then you need to customize it. And the update cycles tend to be long, and the innovation is stifled a bit. But if you use a platform and microservices approach, then you can build apps tailored to your needs and deploy them rapidly. You can still get off-the-shelf apps that work in these environments. It allows you to adapt quickly and be more innovative. So as we make this transition to the new software, we see that most of the suppliers do see the changes that are coming, but they need to support their existing customers on their existing systems for the time being. So they may be a little reluctant to talk about what they're doing in the back room. And they also might not quite have figured out the new selling and revenue models for this software, but they're working on it. So if you're a user, it's time to be thinking about this and be aware of this change coming and start to get ready for it. You might need to think through some organizational and software support requirements. I encourage you to press your suppliers for what their plans are, and be on the lookout for innovative suppliers and solutions as well, because you'll be much nimbler and more agile after the transition. All right, so with that, let me tell you about today's program. So I used this slide to kind of introduce where we're at. And as I was thinking about the speakers I have today, it occurred to me that we're going to cover 4 of these areas really quite well. So our first speaker will be Dr. Min-Kin Mak from SIG, who will cover smart factory and connected products area. Then John Wasik from Dow will talk about digitally transforming the supply chain. And if I can get that to work, Jan Shumate from Eastman Chemical will talk about digitally transforming the construction side of the house. So it's going to be an interesting program. And with that, let me encourage you to welcome to the stage Dr. Min-Kin Mak for our first presentation.